sitting here with Mr Bland today. Now, this is a bit of a this is a first for the South Report. We've gone international. We're actually sitting at Airways Hotel in Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. So we're right near the airport, so you might hear some planes take off and land. A little bit of work going on behind us and maybe even some staff coming up from time to time. We're here with Mr Bland. So first things first, Conan or Conan?
Look, it's Conan, but I've always been called both, so I don't mind either way, Conan or Conan. A lot of staff call me Conan. That's totally fine. And yeah, but it's properly it's Conan.
All right, let's go with Conan. With that name, were there any nicknames growing up?
Not really, not ones that I'd probably put on a podcast, but I think it was Blandy when I joined the army because your last name's on your shirt, so they always just being Australian add a Y onto everything.
So beauty of a podcast is we can go anywhere. So we'll bounce around a little bit about growing up and then what you're doing now. But where did it all start? Tell me your first memory growing up.
My first memory would have been around Cronulla. I grew up in Cronulla, in Sydney. I went to South Cronulla Primary School. My first memory would be probably cooking bread on a stick at Gatamata Park. Yeah, right in Cronulla there. That would have been my first memory. Yeah.
And so you're a Cronulla Shark supporter?
No, Bulldogs actually, because my dad and grandfather lived in Punchbowl. My dad went to Punchbowl Boys, so Canterbury Bulldogs.
Oh, Dad, what was Dad's name?
David.
David and Mum?
Paula.
David and Paula. So where did they meet? Were they from Cronulla? Were they?
They actually met on the beach. Yeah, my dad was a surfer. Yeah, Mum was actually pregnant at the time. She didn't know it. And then Dad ended up raising my older brother.
Older brother's name?
Simon. And they were married in a lion's cage in a circus.
There you go. Now you have. I don't think the listeners will mind me saying you've had a pretty alternate upbringing. So
yeah,
we'll get to a bit of that. So they raise you in the circus.
Yeah, they weren't in the circus, but I think they had something to do with the Lions Club was at the time, and they'd sort of reached out and wanted to know if anyone was willing to do it because it was going to be put in the Guinness Book of Records, 1982. So yeah, they were the first people, I believe, to be married in a lion's cage in a circus with a lion in the lion's cage.
Yeah, definitely a lion in there.
Yeah, it did turn out to be a bit of a metaphor for their marriage, but
and your brother was born at this stage?
He was at that stage, yeah. He was born in 81.
So they get married. They've got one son in tow, and then they have twins.
Correct.
Conan and Abe.
I've got a twin brother, Abram, but yeah, just nicknames Abe.
The listeners, you are identical.
We are pretty identical, yes.
In your mannerisms. So I know you see the differences, but not everyone does. So you grew up in Cronulla. You mentioned primary school. Where did you go to high school?
Well, actually, we moved from Cronulla when I was about 6 years old. So then went down to a place called Woonona at New Wollongong, just next to Bulli there, down Bulli Pass. Lived on the escarpment there. It's a beach town, great little spot. And we went to Woonona Primary School, but we were really lucky that we're actually pretty high achieving in primary school. So we applied for a selective school, which is Smiths Hill. Yeah. It's an academic school like Queensland Academies. And all three of us got in. And yeah, it was a very, very academic school. I think there was something like 1,500 people apply and they only took 130 people into the cohort. So it was a good place to grow up.
What kind of student was Conan Bland growing up? Was he sitting in the front of the class? Was he sitting at the back of the class? Was he answering questions? Was he
I was
looking out the window dreaming of surfing in Cronulla?
Oh, look, I don't know whether to blame my background here, but because I was from an alternative family and probably there was a little bit of tumultuous family background and home situation, which, there's no regret there. It's part of who I am today, that I was probably a little bit mischievous at school. So maybe, that affected my behaviour in the classroom somewhat, but I was always a respectful, sort of kind kid, but I was just probably a little bit wild at that stage.
And Abe, similar?
Yeah, Abe, similar. Yeah, our weekends were spent 15 kilometres from home, wandering through the bush with two German shepherds, catching snakes and yabbies in the creek and bouldering and up to a little bit of mischief, but it was fun. It was a great time to grow up.
No computer games, no sitting behind a screen all weekend, was it?
No, it was just always outside, just figuring out things to do with the environment and the tools that you've got.
So I always say to people I'm interviewing, you can get into, if I ask questions and you're uncomfortable, you can go as deep as you wish when I ask you these things, but we'll get to this later on. But you run our learning support on the senior campus. Growing up, Simon, were you as a young guy aware that he might have had some learning difficulties and maybe some neurodiversity? Was that something that picked up later on?
I mean, there was probably not a name for it. He was definitely quirky and had sort of perceptive interests and behaviours which were pretty noticeable. He found it difficult to sort of socialise with other people. He's very sort of socially isolated for most of his schooling, and I think that probably informed my desire to be in learning support because I had to protect my brother a fair bit. So yeah, he was into computers at that stage, but in very early stages of the Commodore 64s back then, and it was the early DX33 IMB computers, and he'd be already coding at a very young age. So because of that experience, I think it informed that, you know, my desire to get into learning support and support students who are, who have challenges that most don't.
So when you said you were at AIM, there's our second point since we started in there. You said AIM and you were mischievous, but not overly naughty. You did really well at school. What was Simon's schooling like then? And how different would it be if he was going to school now, given that we're so far more advanced in diagnosis? What was he like as a student? And then now looking back, how could that be different?
Well, that's an interesting one. So, I mean, you might assume that he would have done poorly because of all the challenges that he had, but he was so bright, like always extremely intelligent, extremely well read. He escaped a lot into fantasy books and Dungeons and Dragons and Rune Quest and Call of Cthulhu and all those sort of board games that people used to play at that time. But academically, I suppose because he was at Smith Hill High, he did quite well. He ended up going to university and doing pure maths and chemistry, and then eventually computer science.
He works for Google now, is that right?
Worked for Google, yeah. Worked for Atlassian before that and Google. And Google's very supportive of neurodiverse. They've got a large neurodiverse population. And he, having ASD, feels very comfortable there and very well supported. And he's been there now for probably about the same time that I've been at TSS, 15 years, 16 years.
You talked about being well read. You're probably one of the most well read people I've ever met. So this might be a tough question, but on the spot, the best book you've ever read?
I don't think most people will know it, but it's a book called Eastern Approaches by Fitzroy MacLean. Fitzroy MacLean, he was a diplomat during World War II, or prior to the start of World War II. And it was all about his adventures traveling through Marco Polo's old trade route and pre-Sovietized Russia. But the adventures and the descriptions and the way in which it is written, I found it so fascinating. He was actually related to David Stirling, who started the British SAS.
So what age were you when you read this book?
I mean, that one was probably 16, I think. The first book I read was Jonathan Living Seagull. I read that when I was about 5.
That's still a
Novel.
So you mentioned briefly that you were protecting your brother at school, older brother. Let's talk military.
Yep.
Because you then went on to protect our country. Was that something that was instinctive to you? Was it something you wanted to do? You had a protective...
A couple of things there. I think growing up in the escarpment in Wollongong, it was an old training ground for soldiers during Vietnam War. So we'd find expended ammunition and range produce as we were wandering through the bushland. You know, enjoyed that as well. My father was had a very strong interest in military history. My grandfather had 3 rooms in his house that were libraries of military history. So I grew up with a lot of that as an interest within the family. And also I didn't have despite that, I didn't have a strong male role model. My father wasn't what I would say would be a positive male role model. So I think I naturally gravitated towards something which would provide that, which was the military for me. It was absolutely perfect, as well as being wild and requiring that structure that you didn't get. Then I think I sort of naturally gravitated towards that, either consciously or subconsciously, knowing I needed it.
In Sydney?
I joined the reserves to start off with, primarily in the reserves for most of the time, but it was 4-3 Royal New South Wales Regiment when I was just turned 18 in the year 2000.
So you reserves and studying at the time?
Studying a Bachelor of Commerce and a Bachelor of Law at Wollongong University.
Wow. And Abe joined with you?
No, he actually joined about 2.5 years later.
He went into the army proper? Or,
No, he went part-time,
yeah.
just reserves, yeah.
And then deployments.
So I guess for context, prior to joining, it was known as the years of enduring peace. So from the Vietnam War all the way up until the late 90s, there was nothing going on. So people could be in for 25 years and there'd be no deployments. So when I joined in 2000, Timor had just kicked off, and then very quickly September 11 happened, and then Iraq and Afghanistan kicked off. Now, from 2000 to 2010 was a very heavy tempo for both reserves and full-time soldiers, and an opportunity presented in 2002. So I was reasonably new, qualified, 20-year-old young soldier. Two divisions were going to do selection courses to see who could join 570R, full-time battalion. And there was a government experiment at the time to raise a reservist company that would be embedded within a full-time battalion in 570R, called Alpha Company 570R. Now, that hadn't happened, surprisingly, since World War II. And the last unit in which reservists deployed on operations to warlike service was the 39th Battalion, which just happens to be the unit which we are custodians of and hangs in the chapel at TSS. So I've got a pretty strong connection there with that, because for 60 years, there was no reservist unit that was deployed on operational service in warlike service.
So since your battalion, has that continued?
Yeah, since then they've had a number of reservists in bed within companies of full-time battalions. However, not to the same model in which we're used with 570. So I passed all the selection course. I was the second youngest, I think, in the company to pass everything. The average age was about 27. So it was an interesting group. We did 6-7 months of pre-deployment training, and then 7 months deployed to East Timor on the UNMISET mission, which is a United Nations mission in support of East Timor. It's a United Nations, peacekeeping United Nations mission to protect the East Timorese population.
What did you learn about yourself in the military?
Well, I learned that I could assimilate learning new things very quickly, but that I was very suited to that environment. I also learned that how lucky I was. So despite earlier I was talking about, having a background which wasn't ideal, I walked away from that experience. And at that time, East Timor was the poorest country in the world, with a lot of gratitude. And that gratitude is because here in Australia, despite the challenges we face, it pales in comparison to what most people do in other areas of the world, especially developing countries.
So you learn about gratitude. I don't think this country shows, or say PNG, I mean Australia, sitting here at PNG, we probably don't show our gratitude to our soldiers enough. So thank you for your service and what you've done for us. You said you had an unstructured childhood, probably gone into two of the most structured environments you can. You go military, schools.
Yeah.
So was that intentional to get into education?
I remember the day I made the decision. We were doing a sort of vehicle checkpoint between places called Batagade and Bobonaro. Batagade and Ada in East Timor. We were trying to track some people who were illegally smuggling sandalwood, which sounds a bit silly in the context of the entire campaign and chasing the militia and all those sort of things. But so there was we were doing these mobile vehicle checkpoints for a few days, trying to stop these sandalwood smugglers. And there was a little boy that was walking to school each day, and he'd walk 17 kilometres one day and then 17 kilometres back. And all he had to write with was a stick in the sand. And I remember thinking, wow, I'd love to work in developing countries again. How am I going to do this? If whenever I, just decide not to be in the military anymore, and I don't have that opportunity, my initial thoughts were to work in developing countries as a teacher. So I made that decision on that day that I'd get back and become a teacher. But I suppose, down the track, I was lucky enough to get a job at TSS, and I haven't wanted to leave since.
We'll talk a little bit about the learning support. Just back to the military briefly before we get to education. You don't have to name names, but someone in the military that really impressed you. What did you learn from them?
I would say my first commanding officer, Wally Jensen, Lieutenant Colonel Wally Jensen. I was just a boy like everyone else. So same as kids at TSS, same as students. They just want people to believe in them. And he gave me a very overt sense that he believed in me and trusted me, even though I was one of the youngest in his battalion to be a part of that unit. He put my name forward. He signed off on it. He told me I could do it. I could pass all the selection courses. To me, I didn't want to let that person down. Much like in a classroom, if you've got a teacher that overtly tells you that they believe in you and trust you, that student is going to sit there attentive, engaged, because he's got a relationship.
100%. You get to that point where a student doesn't want to let you down. It's a pretty special place to be as an educator.
I think it's an undervalued concept. I think that more teachers, and we certainly do at TSS, but I think the more teachers need to understand the power of rapport and the power of mutual respect and trust and belief. Despite having the evidence, if you tell a student that you believe they can do something, they will go move hell and earth to try and do it.
100%. So we'll get to learning support. Before we do that, you took all those skills from the military. One of the things you did when you came to TSS, you had a very successful career in boarding. But you also, and what I think is undervalued at our school, is what you did for the foundations for our cadet program to where it is now. And Jason Steen came in and had a really strong foundation. What skills did you bring from your military experience? All the things you've learned at uni, why cadets, and what was it that you wanted our cadets to learn?
Yeah, so
you're not a going glorified war person. You're a glorified service person, which is exactly what we want at cadets. So what do you want to bring to that program?
yeah, I'll say that. So Timor finished in 2003, and then I ended up doing another 4 deployments after that. So I got experience with different teams in different contexts in different areas of the world. So 2 other deployments to Malaysia and Singapore, primarily doing jungle training, and then another 2 deployments to the Solomon Islands as a peacekeeper in sort of different roles in that peacekeeping environment. But I suppose out of all that, you develop a sense of what's important to bring people together to achieve a mission or, let's say, a task. And when I came, well, I'll start with before I came to TSS. I was working at Miami High in learning support. I was really enjoying it. I saw this job came up at TSS and it involved the cadets. I was still in reserves at that time. And I thought, look, I'm going to give this a crack, because where it's more than names on the wall, it's more than a cenotaph. The history is everywhere. It's in pictures, but it's in photos of people. It's in photos of where they've been, what they've done, equipment, and various items that you can connect with in a museum or officers' mess or senior NCO's mess. So when I came, I realised that there was no binding physical things apart from names on a wall where people could understand their history and build that they're part of something bigger than themselves. So I quickly asked for permission to use a space and realised that we could put together a bit of a museum and mess, and started off in the afternoons just trying to gather all the photos of all the old boys that were killed in World War I and World War II and put those on a wall to start with, put then those names to a face, and then slowly over time putting together something that looked like an officer's mess or looked like a senior NCO's mess, where you could have all that shared history in one place.
We've certainly created that. And I know some people have jumped in, Deb's jumped in, and Jason Sten's jumped in, but we've got one of the best cadet museums in the country. And I think when you're done and dusted, that legacy will be there forever, which is really special. You've certainly put faces to names to a point now where we've put uniforms to names. We've even got similar rifles and even the medals that a soldier would have had, the 52 fallen soldiers in World War I. So hats off to you and the passion you're showing that. You helped them write a book to honour their name for World War One, doing more in World War Two, and then we're doing with the British government's now tried to do some work around boarding schools that had soldiers. So you're doing some work in that space. So thank you for doing that. And on that note, how did you end up in boarding? It's one of the toughest things you can do as a teacher. You went from the Ready Reserves, you graduate, you're at Miami High, you don't even know that we're a boarding school. You end up with TSS, running the cadet program, learning support that we'll touch on. You end up in boarding. How did that come about?
Well, I think when I be involved in something, I generally like to go all in. I wouldn't have understand how to support students from multiple contexts if I didn't have a really solid understanding of boarding. And so initially I just moved into Delbert House for a year to see what it was like, have a better understanding of that boarding culture. And also practically, I suppose, it was to save a little bit more money, because it is a really good opportunity for young teachers to save money. Yes, you have to give up a fair bit of time, and it can be hard work at times, but what an incredible opportunity, especially in today's environment, for people to save a lot of money. So I started off in Delprat, and then I was fortunate enough to move from Delprat just as a resident master to an assistant housemaster for 4 years down in Biddle, and obviously that's where we work together very closely in Biddle House.
And house master, head of house of Delbra.
Yeah, Delprat for 3 years. Yeah, 3 years in a term. So 9.5 years all up in boarding. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
9.5 years in boarding these days with email and the invention of mobile phones. It's like 50 years back in 1980 when there was only handwritten letters and a landline. So that's a big career in boarding. So we've touched on cadets, left an amazing legacy there. Got your experience in boarding, the learning support side of things. We're a boys' school. There's diagnoses, all sorts of issues that boys have in class. He's so passionate about it. Where did that start? Is that because of Simon, or is it just something you've always been passionate about?
It's interesting because it probably started with Simon, but I guess you got to look at the history of what I try and look introspectively what motivated me, and I think comes down to I wasn't really protected when I was a kid. So I joined the army. I could protect other people. That was hugely motivating for me. And then my brother and I both went into disability support. So I did my postgraduate in education support. It was in a Master of Special Needs and Intervention Science. My brother started a disability support company, and now he's got 100 staff working for him. And a lot of the time, in the absence of having, I suppose, mentors or people that have got their back, some people who have, or a lot of people that have diagnoses and those challenges, they don't really have strong advocates. And I really enjoy being that advocate. I find that incredibly engaging. I absolutely love it. I think I've enjoyed my job more and more each day because it's just incredibly rewarding. I get to protect people. And by protecting them, I just mean that I can help them with some of the challenges that they've got and mitigate some of those challenges in the school environment. It's not just in the classroom, it can be outside of it as well.
We certainly do that. I've never looked at it that way. You're protecting these boys, and we are talking about boys, and I'm sure these two boys wouldn't mind me mentioning their names, but boys who are almost non-verbal coming across from a primary school setting to a senior school setting. The Aaron Trees of this world, the Leo Hughes, to see the success they've had, leadership roles, that must be so rewarding.
It is. Also, they've got, it's a triadic relationship. So you've got, in order to have success in that area, you've got to have supportive parents. We're lucky that we do. Our parents are usually all in. And, those boys, especially that you've mentioned. Yeah.
So from guess you've done cadets, done head of house, a lot of boarding, you've done learning support. Where next for you in education?
Well, that's a really interesting question. For myself, I don't think I want to go anywhere else. I'm very happy to be the head of education board at the Southwest School. I don't want to leave TSS. I enjoy what I do. The role, it doesn't always stay the same. There's always new challenges. We're always growing in terms of the resources that we have and the support that we offer. We're always, as a school, upskilling our staff to try and better cater for students with need. So much so that we've moved away from a lot of schools will retrospectively react to the challenges they see, but our classrooms are universally designed in that when we can predict the variability of the students that we have and predict the variability of the challenges that we're going to face. So we don't need to know who's coming into our classroom that has reading difficulties. We just need to make sure that our lessons are designed to cater for those students.
100%. I would say of all the things you've done, the legacy is we've created a model, hand on heart, that is not reacting anymore. It's completely proactive. So you're not reacting to behaviours or interventions. So proactive, you almost predict pathways so much better now, giving them a structure, a routine. You've talked a lot about being on the teacher side of the table, and kids, let's go to the other side of the table. You're a parent. Talk about your two kids.
Yes, I've got two beautiful kids, Archie and Evie. Archie's 9 years old and Evie's 8 years old. I'm very much looking forward to my boy coming across to the senior school in a couple of years. He's in year 5 now. I think he will fit in perfectly there.
We'll love it. So let's let the audience know Archie's names.
Oh, his name, yeah. So the reason I called him Archie is, this, is because we got significant amount of funding from the local government grants association to build that museum. I didn't do it with my own sweat and tears. The local government supplied a lot in that regard. But during the research of the book for the 52 old boys killed in World War one story stuck out to me, and I found it very powerful as a teaching point for students. It was about a guy named Archibald Hewland Raymond, who was the son of a sawmiller. So he didn't grow up particularly wealthy, but he was recognised for his leadership, and was asked to become an officer rather than an OR. And unfortunately, he died towards the end of the war after serving through Gallipoli all the way through up until a couple of months before the end of the war. He was killed in France with a stray shell that blew him off his horse. That in itself is remarkable, that story. What was remarkable was that he left the Southport School in 1909 and was killed almost 10 years later. But what was in his effects over in France, thousands of kilometres from home, was a small medallion that said 100-yard sprint, the Southport School. And why that struck me was his connection with TSS must have been so strong, because so long after he'd left, he still wanted to take a keepsake with him to remind him of home, and that keepsake was from his school. So I think that's a good message for kids.
Amazing message, Archibald Raymond.
Yeah, so and I went and visited his grave in Flatiron Corpse in France with in 2015 at the 100th anniversary of Gallipoli. It was quite a beautiful place, but my son was born, my wife was pregnant at the time, and my son was born a few months after.
Archibald Bland.
Yeah.
It's pretty special. So he's starting his TSS journey, and you'll start yours as a parent soon, and hopefully that's a way to keep you at TSS a whole lot longer, because while you're here, the boys are in really good hands, and the job you do with those boys is very, very special. So I hope people listen to this, because you're so diverse, what you've done. Not off the hook just yet, because I want to ask you one last question before I ask you some advice for the kids. Did having the parents you had teach you about parenting?
Oh, that's a tough question. I always try and take positives from everything. So despite the difficulties, my father taught me a thirst for knowledge, because he was such a prolific reader and historian. You know, he very intelligent man, but he also encouraged me to question everything. And my mother, despite being very much a hippie, she's extremely kind and caring and loving. And out of that situation, I think I was taught maybe some things not to do as a parent, which I learnt from, and some things to do as a parent.
Brother, very close, you know, military experience, teaching experience. What advice would you give the boys of 2026 that are listening to this?
I think we live in a world now where things are very comfortable, and that we get things very easily, and that we don't really need as much patience as we did 20 years ago or 100 years ago or 200 years ago. I think that you need to be comfortable being uncomfortable. There are a lot of things that you're going to experience outside of school that are going to test your resilience. So leading up to when you leave, you shouldn't run away with things that you find difficult, and look for things that are difficult and persist through them and develop grit. In the absence of that, you're just teaching yourself and normalising that it's okay to run away from your challenges, and you're gonna have a lot after you leave school. So don't shy away from them.
It's good advice. So if there's someone listening to this that has a child who, so a parent has a child who's having some issues in the classroom and is seeking support, what advice would you give a parent who might have a neurodiverse son or daughter that's listening to this?
I mean, they're obviously not always going to be at TSS. At any school, you need to be a strong advocate as a parent. You know, we aren't the experts in your children, you are. And if you're a strong advocate, you're passing on information which is going to be really pertinent to their schooling. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't feel like a pain. Don't feel like a helicopter parent. That information is crucial. You know, we're the experts as it is how to mitigate challenges that may occur in the classroom, but the personal information is really important as well. And so we need to have a really good understanding and grounding of that student.
It's very good advice for parent. We say that a lot as teachers. Parents know lections better than anyone. So great advice for kids, great advice for the parents. Thank you for spending a bit of time for the South Report. Hope all goes well on the national fishing titles up here in PNG. Thanks for spending a little bit of time on the South Report.
No worries, you too.